The sky burned with the orange of a dying day, and the wind dragged long shadows across the scrubland. Dust whispered through brittle yucca and low mesquite, scouring the rocks like sandpaper over bone. Blood had dried at her temple, cracking like old paint. Her moccasins, once soft with deer hide, now scraped the earth, worn to ruin. Behind her the hills stood like silent judges, and ahead nothing but open land and sky. Lozen staggered, a bundle of cloth pressed to her ribs, soaked with a darker stain. Her breath came shallow, the taste of copper thick on her tongue. Far off, a hawk wheeled in silence, its shadow passing like a ghost across her path. Each step forward was borrowed from the will of something greater than the body anger, maybe, or the memory of her brother's face, still and bloodied beneath the burning sun. The men who took him had not taken her, but they had tried. What they hadn't expected was her blade, nor the way it sank into one of them before she ran. The land stretched on, hot and unmoved by her suffering. She fell once, hard, hands tearing against gravel. The pain flared white behind her eyes, but she didn't cry out. There was no one to hear her. She lay still for a moment, cheek pressed to the earth, as if listening for something. Then she rose. In the distance, a dark line carved itself against the horizon, a fence maybe, or a dry creek bed. Beyond it, the slow rise of hills gave way to the blurred edge of cottonwoods. A ranch, perhaps, shelter, or another kind of danger. Her legs were trembling, but she moved forward, arms clenched tight around her ribs. The sun dipped lower, and with it came the first breath of evening, cool and edged with the scent of cattle and iron. She didn't see the rider until the hoofbeats broke the stillness like a shot. He rode slow, like a man used to wide spaces and long silences. Tall in the saddle, dust-colored hat pulled low, he was part of the land, sinewed, sun-worn. His horse stopped with a snort, uneasy at her shape in the dusk. He didn't reach for his rifle. Not yet. Lozen stood with her shoulders back, blood on her chin, and eyes that held no plea. He looked at her, then dismounted without a word. The wind moved between them like breath held too long. He stepped forward, quiet, cautious, not like a lawman or a bounty hunter, but like someone who had seen suffering before and did not flinch from it. "Looks like you've been shot," he said. She didn't answer. He nodded once, as if to himself. "Name's Eli." Still, she said nothing. "I ain't gonna hurt you," he added, "but you're bleeding all over my land." Only then did her knees give. She collapsed without grace, the world folding in around her like dusk swallowing light. He caught her before her head hit the ground. Her breath rasped against his shirt. Eli lifted her like something precious, though she weighed little more than a sack of corn, and turned toward the shadowed shape of a barn half swallowed by cottonwoods. As he carried her, the first stars crept out, pale and watchful. The night took the land in its quiet arms, and somewhere in the distance, dogs began to bark. The barn was cool and dark, its wooden walls thick with old hay and the scent of animal musk. A single oil lamp burned near the stall, casting an amber glow across rough-hewn beams. Eli laid her down on a cot he kept for calving nights and long storms, and for a moment he just looked at her, skin dark with sun and heritage, cheekbones sliced clean from the fall, blood seeping still beneath her ribs. He fetched water from a barrel outside, hands steady despite the churn in his chest. He hadn't seen eyes like hers since the war, clear, defiant, and past fear. He brought the water, some linen torn from a feed sack, and a bottle of whiskey he only opened for the coldest nights. When she stirred, he poured a capful between her lips. She coughed, but swallowed. "You got a name?" he asked. She blinked at the ceiling, breath shallow, but said nothing. "That's all right," Eli muttered. "You can keep it for now." He unwrapped the bundle she'd been clutching and found a blood-soaked rag, and beneath it a clean wound, clean but deep, torn just under the ribs. Not fresh, but not yet healing. A rifle shot, he guessed. Maybe a pistol. He'd seen enough to know the difference. "Bullets out," he said aloud, though she didn't respond. "But you'll need rest. Quiet." She watched him, eyes tracking every movement. He saw no gratitude, only suspicion carved deep, and maybe shame, though whether for needing help or having survived, he couldn't tell. "I ain't gonna take you into town," Eli said. "Ain't gonna ask what happened neither. You're here now. That's all that matters." Still no answer. He dipped the cloth in water, cleaned the wound, and wrapped her tight. She flinched, but didn't cry out. Tough. Not just from pride born of something older, like she didn't expect comfort. As he worked, thunder rumbled far off, like a promise or a warning. Outside, the wind picked up. The night creaked with old wood and memories. When he finished, Eli sat back on his heels, wiping sweat from his brow. "You'll live," he said, more to himself than her. She closed her eyes. In the quiet, something settled between them, not peace, but the thinnest thread of something like it. He left the lamp low and stepped out into the yard. His dog, Boone, padded up from the porch, ears twitching. "She's Apache," Eli said. "Or was. Don't matter. Someone wanted her dead." Boone whined, tail low. Eli scanned the dark. He knew what the law did to people like her, what neighbors did, even the ones who went to church. A woman on the run, brown-skinned and bleeding, didn't stand a chance. But he'd seen enough men hanged who didn't deserve it, and enough women buried with no name. The stars blinked cold above the cottonwoods. He turned back toward the barn. Inside, her breathing had eased into a rhythm, not sleep, but something near it. He pulled a blanket over her, careful not to touch skin. Her face, even in pain, was proud. A woman who'd known hunger, fire, death, and still chose to walk forward. He sat beside her, on the ground, back against the stall, one hand resting near his boot knife. He didn't trust her yet, but he believed in things that needed hiding. And in the dark, under the groan of an old roof, two strangers breathed the same barn dust and waited for dawn to choose who they would be. The morning came slow and sullen, draped in a low fog that turned the pasture to pale smoke. Eli stood at the edge of it, coffee in one hand, watching his cattle move like ghosts across the field. The mountains beyond were only suggestions, barely visible through the gauze of mist. Back in the barn, she had not spoken, but she had eaten slow, cautious bites of cornbread and beans. He left the tin plate near her cot and went about his chores without glancing back. She watched him, though, every motion, every silence. By midday, the sun burned the fog away, and the land returned to itself hard, cracked, and gold with dying grass. Eli came in carrying a saddle blanket and a clean shirt, one that had belonged to his father. "You're gonna need these," he said, laying them beside her. "Can't have you stinking like blood if anyone rides by." She sat upright, slower now, holding her side. Her fingers shook, but her eyes no longer drifted in fever. She looked at him then, not past, not through, but at. "I'm called Lozen," she said. Her voice was low, scratched raw, but it held weight. He nodded once. "You want me to call you that?" "Yes." He crouched near the cot again, arms draped across his knees. "You got someone looking for you?" Lozen didn't answer. "Because if it's the sheriff, or them bastards from the fort, I need to know how close the wolves are." "They're not law," she said after a moment. "Just men, white coats. One of them, he carried needles. Spoke like a preacher, said I was property now." Eli felt his jaw clench. He'd seen those men before, doctors riding under flags, taking women from camps, calling it mercy. "They kill your kin?" he asked. Lozen looked toward the door. "My brother." That was all she said. But it was enough. Eli stood, fingers flexing once at his sides. He didn't say sorry. There was no point. Instead, he went out, came back with a hammer and spare boards, and began fixing the barn wall nearest the road. She watched as he worked, sweat cutting through the dirt on his arms. Each nail he drove seemed louder than the last. When the sun dipped again, she stepped outside, moving slow. Her feet touched the ground like she didn't quite trust it. "You fenced this whole stretch yourself?" He looked up from a coil of wire. "My father started it. I finished. Took me 6 years." Lozen nodded, fingers trailing the split wood gate. "Why so far out?" Eli hesitated. "Some men are born to noise. Some of us aren't." She looked out at the spread land folded like old parchment, dotted with cattle and dry wind. "You live alone." "I had a wife," he said. "She left. Couldn't stand the quiet." Lozen didn't ask more. She didn't need to. The man moved like someone who had grown used to absence, like a porch chair left rocking in the wind. She helped him feed the horses. Slow at first, unsteady, but her hands knew animals. They didn't shy from her. He noticed that. That night, they shared stew in silence, seated outside the barn with the stars thick overhead. Coyotes sang somewhere beyond the ridge, and for once, the wind didn't feel like it carried bad omens. Lozen leaned back against the post, eyes half-lidded. "You know they'll come," she said. "I know, and you'll be part of it now." Eli nodded, sipping slow from his cup. "Maybe I already was." She didn't smile, but something in her eyes softened, just a little. And for the first time since she'd crossed onto his land, she didn't look like she was waiting to run. The next morning broke, with the dry crackle of heat rising early. No dew on the grass, no softness in the wind, just sun, hard and unblinking, pouring over the ridge like molten brass. Lozen stood at the trough, scooping water onto her face, her breath short. The bandage at her ribs was stiff now, stuck to dried blood and healing skin. She moved better, though, stronger. Her hair was tied back with a piece of Eli's old saddle string, and she wore his father's shirt tucked into her own faded skirt, cinched with rawhide at the waist. Eli watched from the porch, coffee cup warm in his hands. "You're up early," he said. Lozen didn't turn, couldn't sleep. He nodded. "The nights here don't forgive much." She dipped her hands again, drank from them, then looked toward the fence line. "I can work." Eli hesitated. Then, "You ever mend wire?" "I've set traps, skinned deer, worked horses. I can mend wire." He tossed her a pair of gloves, leather cracked and sun-bleached. They rode out together, quiet, the horses kicking dust into the dawn. It wasn't a smooth ride. She winced with every jolt, but she didn't complain. He noticed how she scanned the hills, always watching. He didn't ask what she looked for. He had a feeling it was ghosts. At the south fence, they found a post fallen, wire slack like snapped veins. Cattle had drifted beyond it, dumb and slow. Eli handed her the hammer. "Hold it steady. I'll brace the back." She didn't speak, but she worked. One hand to press the post, the other to wrap wire tight. Sweat beaded on her brow. Her fingers moved with precision, a kind of reverence. Like work was a language she knew better than prayer. Eli studied the way she worked, efficient, strong, no wasted movement. A woman used to surviving, not living. "You always been alone?" he asked. She paused. The hammer stilled. "I had my people. Then I had my brother. And now?" She didn't answer, but the silence between them was thicker than before. By noon, the wire held firm. She sat on a rock, cradling her side, breath heaving. "You push too hard, that wound'll tear again," he warned. "I've had worse." He offered her the canteen. She drank long. They ate jerky and hard bread under the shadow of a cottonwood. "You plan to stay?" he asked. She looked at him, the barest flicker of caution in her eyes. "You planning to ask me to leave?" "No." Silence. Then, "I don't know what I plan. Not manido." A dust devil twisted in the distance, scattering brittle grass into the sky. Back at the homestead, she helped shovel out the stalls, stripped sweat-soaked bandages from her side, and cleaned the wound in the horse trough like she didn't feel the sting. Eli brought fresh cloth and stood with his back turned while she wrapped it. "You don't ask many questions," she said. "I figure folks give answers when they're ready." She nodded slowly. "Most men want something for kindness. I ain't most men." That night, as stars spilled like salt across black velvet, Lozen sat near the barn door, whittling a piece of mesquite into something shapeless but careful. Eli brought her an old blanket, laid it on the porch. "There's space in the house," he said, "if you want it." She glanced at the dark windows. "I'm not ready." "All right." He turned to go, then stopped. "If you ever are, it's yours." Lozen looked up at the stars, and for the first time her shoulders eased. Just a little. 3 days passed beneath the quiet churn of the sun, each one pressing into the land like a branding iron. The routine settled into place, not of comfort, but of necessity. Eli worked the cattle and repaired the gate on the north range. Lozen fed the chickens, swept the barn, and learned the cadence of silence that hung between them like a shared coat. They spoke little, but their movements began to match his gait, slowing to hers when she favored her side, her hands knowing when to pass him tools before he asked. Not intimacy, not yet, but rhythm. One evening, while Eli was oiling the hinges of the bunkhouse, he found her standing inside the corral, one hand outstretched to a skittish mare. The horse had been half wild since winter, always backing from touch, But Lozen didn't force it. She stood still, murmuring low in a language Eli didn't know, voice as soft as wind across sage. The mayor took a step forward. "You break horses?" he asked. "I listened to them." He leaned against the post. "That works?" "It's slower." Her hand touched the mayor's nose. No flinch, no recoil, just breath shared between beings built to endure. That night she followed him into the house for the first time. The kitchen was simple wood stove, rough-hewn table, shelf lined with jars of peaches and beans. Eli handed her a plate without ceremony. She sat across from him, spine straight, eyes scanning the walls like they held stories. He poured 2 cups of coffee. "My father built this place with his brothers," he said. "Came west after the war. Said the land would make men of them. Mostly it broke them instead." Lozen sipped slowly. "My father died in a canyon. My mother beneath a white flag. He didn't ask how. Didn't need to. They ate in quiet. Wind creaked the shutters. Somewhere outside, a coyote barked once, then was gone." After the meal, Eli showed her a drawer of old books. "I used to read these aloud," he said, "when my wife was still here." Lozen picked up a worn copy of Walden, ran her fingers across the cracked spine. "She didn't like it out here? Didn't like what it did to me?" Lozen nodded. "It carves you from the inside." Eli watched her in the lamplight. "But you stayed." "I had nowhere to leave to." He looked down, fingers tracing the grain of the table. "Neither did I." When she stood to leave, he said, "There's a bed upstairs. Clean sheets, if you want." She hesitated, then nodded. "Not yet." But when she walked out, her steps didn't falter. Eli watched the door long after it closed, the silence thick with things unsaid. Later, when sleep wouldn't come, he stepped outside and found her sitting on the porch steps, arms around her knees. "Thought you'd be sleeping," he said. "You don't sleep much." He sat beside her. The boards were cool beneath them. "I keep thinking they'll come," she said. "Those men, the ones who hunted me. They might. And if they do, I'll be here." The words fell between them, heavy and true. She turned toward him, moonlight softening the hollows of her face. "You could hand me over. No one would blame you." "I would." She looked at him a long while, not searching, just seeing. And for the first time, she leaned her shoulder lightly against his. Not for warmth, for witness. The sky above them stretched wide and old, and for a while, neither moved. A week later, they found the tracks. Eli was mending the fence near the east pasture when Boone began to growl, low and constant. The dog never barked without cause. Eli crouched beside a patch of churned soil and found what he feared: boot prints, deep and fresh. 2 sets. Riders. He didn't say anything until nightfall. Didn't want to stir panic. But Lozen noticed the shift in him. The quiet had teeth now. His eyes tracked the hills more often. He slept with the rifle leaned just inside the door. When she saw the tracks herself, she didn't flinch. How close? 3 miles, maybe 2. Drifting west, but slow. Like they're looking. They are. Eli sat on the porch step, rifle across his knees, the dog at his feet. "You still have time to run." She stood at the edge of the yard, hair loose in the wind. "And if I do, they'll follow. Just like before." "Then we stay." She nodded. There was no need to thank him. Something deeper than gratitude moved between them now. They prepared without speaking of it. Lozen dug the old Colt from the cellar where Eli had buried it after the war. He showed her how to clean the chamber, how to fire, steady from cover. She showed him how to sharpen a blade with stone until it sliced paper in silence. At night, they barely slept. Lozen sat by the barn window. Eli kept to the porch. Boone patrolled the yard like a shadow given purpose. 2 days later, they came. The riders approached just past noon. Dust trailed behind them like smoke from a slow fire. They didn't wear uniforms, no badges, no banners. Just coats too clean and boots too polished for this land. Eli stepped into the road with his rifle cradled low but ready. Lozen watched from the barn loft, Colt in hand. The lead rider tipped his hat. "Fine day," he said. Ellie didn't answer. "We're looking for someone. A woman. Dangerous. Don't know any dangerous women out here." "Is that so?" The man smiled, but it didn't touch his eyes. "Thing is, we tracked her this far. Apache. Young. Might be wounded." Eli scratched his jaw. Ain't seen anyone but cattle. Mind if we have a look around? I do. The silence that followed was tight enough to snap. The second rider shifted in his saddle, hand near his holster. You protecting her? I protect what's mine. They stared at each other across the distance long enough for the wind to die. Then came the sound, not thunder, not hooves, the crack of a pistol shot, clean and exact. The second rider's hat flew off, and he ducked instinctively. Lozen stepped out from the barn roof, her silhouette sharp against the sky. I don't miss twice, she called. The riders hesitated. She ain't yours, Eli said, and this land don't answer to your kind. Another pause. The first rider weighed his odds. Eli could see it in the twitch of his jaw, the way his horse skittered under tension. Then he pulled back on the reins. This isn't over. Eli nodded. It is if you ride fast enough. They turned. Dust swallowed them. When it cleared, the land was quiet again. Lozen climbed down from the loft. Her hands shook, just barely. Eli met her at the barn. You shot his hat clean off, he said. She gave a tired smile. I said I listened to horses. I never said I couldn't shoot. He laughed, low and real. And for the first time, she leaned into him, not from exhaustion, but from choice. They stood there a long while, held in a peace they had carved out themselves. The next morning broke gentle, the sun low and gold, spilling over the ridge like honey. The wind smelled of rain far off, though the earth remained cracked and dry. Lozen stood in the field, her boots pressing into the dust, watching the mare she'd gentled nudge a salt block with her nose. Her hand rested on the fence post, the grain rough beneath her fingers, but her shoulders were soft. Eli came from the house with 2 tin cups of coffee, his boots scuffing the dirt. He offered one without a word. She took it. They drank in silence. A good silence. Not the kind that hides things. The kind that says, I see you. I am here. He glanced at her. They won't be back. She nodded. But others might. Then we'll be ready. They stood together, not touching, but near enough that the heat from his body caught the edge of hers. The fields stretched wide around them, the hills dark with pine, the sky endless above. Later they worked the land side by side. She held the post steady while he drove nails. He steadied the ladder as she replaced the loose board above the barn door. She winced as she climbed her wound, not yet healed fully, but she said nothing. When the storm finally came, it came fast. Wind kicked up first, swirling dust into their eyes. Then the first fat drops smacked the ground with the weight of promise. They ran, laughing like children who had outrun something older than fear. By the time they reached the porch, they were soaked. Eli peeled off his wet shirt, wringing it with one hand. Lozen leaned against the doorframe, hair plastered to her cheeks, smile pulling at the corners of her mouth like it hadn't in years. You ever think you'd end up here? He asked. She shook her head. I never thought I'd end up anywhere. He stepped close, slow, gave her time. If you wanted, he said carefully, this could be a start, not a rescue, not a cage, just a place to be. She met his eyes, steady. I want to learn how to stay. Eli reached out, brushing a strand of wet hair from her cheek. Then we'll build from there. That night, she moved into the house. Not because she needed to, because she chose to. Her things were few a blade, a small carved figure she never explained, the shirt she refused to throw away though it was torn and blood-stained. She folded them neatly on the shelf beside his books. They slept in the same bed, backs to each other at first. But in the deep hush of night, her hand found his beneath the quilt. He didn't speak, just closed his fingers around hers and held on. Seasons changed. The fields greened, then browned. The wound on her side faded to a scar. She taught him how to track elk without disturbing the land. He taught her to read by lantern light, his voice low over pages of worn paper. Together they rebuilt the north fence. They painted the barn door. One day she handed him a small bundle soft buckskin, tied with string. Inside was a tiny pair of moccasins. Eli looked up, eyes wide. She just nodded, tears sharp in her eyes but unfallen. You gave me a place to stay. Now I want to give you a reason to keep it. He didn't speak, just wrapped her in his arms, and the wind pressed soft against the windows, as if it, too, had been waiting for this moment. And so, in the heart of hard land and harder years, something new took root. A child not yet born, a promise sealed in silence, a home not marked on any map, but built from the bones of endurance and the grace of choosing to stay.